The last day of school before Christmas was always something I looked forward to as a kid. I loved Christmas in general, and although I anticipated the holiday itself even more, I thoroughly enjoyed the school Christmas party. There'd be a Christmas disco, a buffet, party hats, Christmas crackers, and games like Pass the Parcel and musical chairs, all accompanied by classic Christmas pop songs from bands like Slade and Wham. Things changed a bit as we got older and moved into secondary school. Afternoon Christmas parties were gone, and the buffet with party bags was replaced by just a few pigs in blankets at lunchtime. But the festive spirit was still there. Some teachers wore Christmas jumpers and were much more relaxed than usual, while others simply let us watch an hour of A Muppet Christmas Carol, or, in the case of our history teacher in 2003, the entire first hour of Saving Private Ryan. Yet that same year, the last day before the Christmas holidays, turned out to be anything but festive. I remember it was a Friday in December 2003, and this might seem a bit like a time warp, but I distinctly recall my friends and me being super excited to play Call of Duty. The original game, back when it was a World War II shooter, had come out that autumn. The same year our history teacher had shown us Saving Private Ryan, even though we were in year 8 and the film was rated 15, which was very cool of him. So, as you can imagine, my mates and I were beyond hyped about playing a cutting-edge FPS set during that era, and it had been all we talked about for weeks. After lunch, spirits were high as we sat in geography class. The teacher had once again decided to put on a film and wasn't too bothered about us chatting among ourselves. My friend Nick and I were discussing Call of Duty at our desk, which was on the right side of the classroom by the windows, overlooking the school's main courtyard from the second floor. As I chatted with Nick, I glanced over his shoulder and into the empty courtyard. I was mostly paying attention to him, and since the courtyard was deserted with classes in session, there wasn't much to distract me. But then suddenly, a man I didn't recognize walked into the empty courtyard, dressed in a dark jumper, jeans, and what looked like work boots. While I didn't recognize him, it wasn't unusual to see ground staff or visitors around, so I didn't find his appearance particularly alarming and continued talking to Nick. But then, instead of walking across the courtyard, the man stopped and looked around as if he were lost. Again, that behavior didn't strike me as odd. People new to a place often do that. Yet, instead of glancing around and moving on, the man stopped, looked up at the sky, and started staring. I was distracted from Nick for a second time and gave the man such a confused look that Nick turned to see what I was looking at. We both stared at him, wondering what he was doing. Nick cracked a joke about a seagull aiming its droppings and saying, "I'm dreaming of a shite Christmas," until our teacher told us to stop swearing. I honestly thought the guy would have moved on by the time we were told off, but he was still there, staring at the gray sky as if hypnotized or seeing something no one else could. The spot where he stood was surrounded by buildings, like the teacher's lounge, the modern languages block, and the geography block, which was where we were. As we watched, a French teacher named Miss Hamilton came out of the teacher's lounge, did a double take when she saw the man, and then tried to walk past him. At first, he didn't seem to notice her, but then, suddenly, he spun around to look at her, and his entire demeanor changed in an instant. His eyes lit up, and as he aggressively turned toward her, she stopped dead. He raised something above his head. Although I couldn't see what it was, Miss Hamilton clearly could. She backed up a few steps, then turned and ran toward the teacher's lounge, with the man close behind her, though not quite as fast. In a split second, Nick and I went from laughing to realizing something serious was happening. Nick didn't watch the whole scene. Instead, he turned to our geography teacher shouting, "Sir! Sir! Someone's chasing Miss Hamilton!" I saw the whole thing. She barely made it back into the teacher's lounge before the man began banging at the door with what I could now see was a hammer or mallet. Our geography teacher, Mr. Griffiths, quickly realized the gravity of the situation. He told us all to stay put, not to look out the windows, and then ran out of the classroom and downstairs to lock the door to the geography block. When he returned, he told us what he'd done, which made us feel a bit safer, but we were all still aware that a hammer-wielding man was on the loose. Mr. Griffiths looked out the window and saw the police arriving. He called out, "The police are here, children." Everything's going to be fine, and he was right. The police officers entered the block and eventually subdued the man with a stun gun. We remained in lockdown for another hour until the head teacher announced that the man had been safely taken off the school grounds. After that, students whose parents could pick them up were allowed to go home. It was the most chaotic atmosphere I'd ever experienced at school, and something really terrible had almost happened. Miraculously, no one at the school was seriously hurt. It turned out the man, a tradesman with a wife and baby on the way, had suffered a severe mental breakdown, starting his rampage just a few days before Christmas. It's terrifying to think that someone could lose their mind so completely, and that, in that state, they might target children. He was close, very close. The summer before my senior year of high school brought an unexpected connection with a guy named Sean. Our friend groups had merged over the break, and while two of our mutual friends were dating, Sean and I found ourselves in a situationship. At first, he seemed to understand the boundaries I set, especially since I made it clear I liked him, but not enough to consider him a boyfriend. With senior year, the most crucial year of high school ahead of us, I wanted no distractions. Sean initially respected this. As school resumed, it became evident Sean had no intention of letting things go. Though we kept things professional and avoided the idea of hooking up again, I could tell he was still interested. I won't deny I shared some of those feelings, but Sean was the kind of distraction I didn't need. Over the holidays, he made an enticing offer. Claiming he could manage his emotions and respect my need to focus on school, he proposed that we could casually hook up during winter break. Flattered by his persistence and eager for some holiday company like my friends had, I agreed, thinking he'd stay mature once school started again. During Christmas and New Year's, we went on a few dates, which were great. But before returning to school, Sean asked for a serious talk. Dreading the inevitable conversation, I agreed, hoping to make my stance clear once and for all. Sean suggested study sessions as a way to spend time together during school. While it sounded sweet, I knew it would blur the lines too much and declined. He even proposed moving to NYC if I got into NYU, so we could pursue a relationship. The idea of him uprooting his life for me felt overwhelming and pressured. I wanted no part of it. Our discussion spiraled into an argument. Despite my repeated attempts to leave before saying something hurtful, Sean wouldn't let me go. Frustration boiled over, and we both said things we regretted, ending the relationship on a bitter note. What had started as casual turned into an overblown fixation on his part. On a friend's advice, I decided to go no contact. This was easier said than done since we attended the same school. Though we didn't share classes, bumping into him in the hallways was inevitable. When he tried to get my attention, I ignored him, keeping my focus forward. Acknowledging him wouldn't help either of us move on. But Sean escalated matters by showing up at my house uninvited. The first and only time he tried this, I told him he had 1 minute to leave before I got my dad involved. When he refused, I followed through. My dad confronted him, and the situation quickly turned chaotic. Hearing my dad yell, "Are you crazy? Get the hell off my property," was mortifying, but part of me was relieved it was coming to a head. Sean tried to resist but was no match for my dad, who dragged him off the property. Things took a darker turn when Sean threatened me, saying he'd do something to me at school before spring break. My dad contacted the school principal, resulting in Sean's suspension for the days leading up to the break. While it offered some relief, I couldn't shake the fear that Sean might still confront me outside school. On the last day before break, I asked a classmate named Ryan for a ride home. Though not close friends, he kindly agreed after hearing about my situation. Walking to his car after school, I finally felt a sense of relief, until I heard the roar of an engine and screeching tires. Turning around, I saw a silver sedan speeding toward us. In that instant, I thought I was about to die. Ryan shoved me out of the way, taking the full brunt of the car's impact. He was thrown through the air and landed hard, suffering severe injuries. Sean, the driver, had clearly intended to harm me. As Sean reversed for another attempt, I managed to dodge, using the parked cars as cover. He fled before the police arrived. Ryan, the true hero, had a fractured skull, broken ribs, a pelvic fracture, and other serious injuries, while I walked away with only a broken arm. Years later, Ryan and I reconnected over drinks, and what started as a catch-up turned into a regular thing. Now I'm set to marry him this summer, forever grateful for the man who saved my life. As for Sean, he was sentenced to 15 years for attempted murder. I haven't kept track of his status or release because it's irrelevant. If he ever dared to show up again, it would be the last mistake he'd make. I went to high school with a boy named Ashley, or Ash as most of us called him. Ash had blonde curly hair, a slight overbite, and was ever so slightly overweight. He could look quite slow sometimes, staring glassy-eyed and slack-jawed at the blackboard during reception period. But in reality, Ash was pretty sharp. His grades were good. He was in the chess club during years 7 and 8, and he even joined the debate team for a while before things went pear-shaped for him at school. Unfortunately, as well as being one of the cleverest lads in our year group, Ash was also a complete weirdo. To give you an idea of just how weird Ash was, I once heard he had a deathly phobia of vinegar. 3 lads in my year group told me this in the dinner hall one lunchtime. But since they were laughing when they told me, I didn't believe them and very foolishly decided to test out their claim. A few minutes later, Ash walked over with his dinner tray and sat a few chairs down from me. After getting his attention, I flicked a bottle of vinegar in his direction, causing a few drops of it to land on the jacket of his school uniform. At first, he seemed confused, looking at me as if to say, "Have you gone mental?" I half expected to see the lads who told me about his phobia laughing, but when I looked over, they were horrified. Not a split second later, the whole dining room heard this ear-splitting screech. Ash jumped up so hard his chair fell over, and then he went running out of the dining hall with literal tears in his eyes. He had realized it was vinegar I'd flicked on him, and his reaction was to completely freak out. Ash was a bit weird, but also a bit of a prankster, so when he ran out screaming, most kids assumed it was a joke. However, when we later found out his reaction was genuine, Ash solidified his reputation as, to put it nicely, an absolute Fruit Loop. I actually got into a bit of trouble over the vinegar flicking incident, but nothing too serious. Ash accepted my apology, so there were no hard feelings. Ash continued performing well at school, and even got to be quite hard. Weeks passed, and although the school bought a special wheelie bin to lock up the crates, the thief started unlocking it with an Allen key. Everyone knew it was happening, but no one cared apart from the school. Then one morning, I solved half the mystery. Our school had a breakfast club, and Ash was almost always there. But one morning I saw what looked like an Allen key in his fist when he reached for change. I caught up with Ash and asked him why he had it. At first he denied it, but when I asked if he was stealing crates, his sly smile told me all I needed to know. I swore not to tell anyone, but asked why he was stealing so many. Ash just winked and said, "You'll see." We didn't find out what he meant until the last day of school. On May 25th, we arrived to see a massive wooden structure on the sports field, a 13 to 14-foot high pyramid of crates soaked in petrol. By lunchtime, hundreds of kids surrounded the structure. Someone lit it, and seconds later, there was an explosion. The aftermath was horrifying: cuts, burns, and screams. Some kids were severely injured. Ash was never punished, as he didn't light the bonfire. But he had planned it, trusting excitable kids wouldn't resist, and he was right.